So in their case, there was actually at least 5 different sources of data to begin with, because the planned and actual information for just their abandonment stuff was in one database called Wellview. Okay. Any of you use Wellview? See some heads nodding, right? Another set of information for the remediation and decommissioning stuff, the actuals, that was in Envision. Any Envision users out there? There was a third system in play, which the planning was being done and monthly actual stuff for remediation and decommissioning, as well as some important non-financial information was in a system called Peak. Okay? I know there's a couple of you that are or were Peak users. And the reason the non-financial information was real important is when you're looking at the financial data, often you don't know who the project manager is or what the dates or the risk ranking of the projects were. So that other non-financial information, very important, but sometimes stored somewhere completely different, but a very key piece of organizing, budgeting, and planning. Okay? A fifth system was WellCore. I know there's some WellCore users out there, and that was actually the reclamation stuff. And then obviously their retirement obligations were in I think a custom-built solution called ARO. So 5 different data sets that they're trying to manage and pull together, from trying to understand the numbers. That's a pretty ominous task for those 3 gals, because everything was coming out to CSV files and being sliced and diced. So the first thing we did was, okay, let's get that all into at least a single point of truth. Not the master, but let's put an ETL process in place that extracts the data from those different systems on a nightly basis for, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and loads it into Palo. So that's step 1. So at least they have a single point of truth for that information. But that wasn't everything they needed in their decision process, because they also had some ad hoc spreadsheets and stuff, some one-time data sets like historic ground disturbance lists and 5-year budget plans that had been generated. So Matthias says we can hook to all the systems. We can also hook to data sources like simple CSVs or spreadsheets and things. Very key piece of pulling it all together. And then the final piece, they needed monthly information from their various field contributors, because the traditional means of going through the invoice processes to get the spends and things just were not timely enough. So they needed a web browser input for certain things like, let's update our obligations for this year and mass process to send it out to those 13 providers, yada, yada, yada. So these are the 7 different data sources involved, which on a regular basis, most of them nightly, were being pulled into Palo to set this foundation in place for their different business processes. Now when we went there, we went for a single solution, but within 12 months they had 26 different applications running on this. When I say applications, I say spreadsheet front ends to Palo back-end data. Was there a question?
Where's the Palo database being stored? Is that here on their servers?
They have it on a VM. They just set us up with a VM. We threw Palo on there, and
okay.
I think IT did that once, and then we never saw them again.
Okay.
Is there anyone here from Talisman IT? Just make sure first. No, I'm kidding. I was expecting Steve, but I think he's having a baby today.
His wife is. Not him. Just saying.
Biology classes by Kevin Lindley. I did a little. Okay, so I'm not going to go over 26 applications with you, but just to give you some screen captures and a real high-level understanding, these kind of, I mean, they don't look very pretty, but they function. It's just Excel on the front end kind of thing. But one of them is a portfolio budget monitoring solution for internal staff that were basically tracking 11 financial values across those 1,300 active projects. We had 7 levels of accountability because it started with Nevin, Darren, and Todd, and then it worked its way down through internal coordinators right to the field, to the individual projects. Okay? Across 13 geographical areas, yada, yada, yada. So project portfolio monitoring is a very good application to this to be used for. Okay? Then the external folks obviously had a different view. They were, sometimes they were spread in the hierarchy over here, but show me my list of projects. So when Matrix logs in, they'd see their projects. Earthmaster logs in, they see their projects, and they don't see each other's stuff because that wouldn't be very good. Okay. Some other stuff, there's a monthly budget planning process where on a monthly basis they can go in and tweak things. Okay. Sounds much funnier over there. There's a formalized process now for prioritizing the efforts. I say risking the projects, but I think legal says don't say risk. Okay, but basically it's prioritizing it into high, medium, and low, where if we're going to spend some extra money, where are we going to do it? On the priority one stuff. And the process for prioritizing is this. Okay, so I'll stop now, but there's lots we can talk about after. There's a dozen examples of things that, you know, and this was done very operationally by a group of people with some support from Grid. Okay. So, what did it look like a year later? They actually got the same amount of stuff done with $30 million. And the budget was actually adjusted in that very volatile year 4 times or 3 times, I think. And the expenditure data can actually be updated daily. And the actual consolidation process of those old spreadsheets that came in and literally 3 or 4 people working on them for 4 or 5 days, gone, automatic. And 100% of their retirement obligations are audited. Now this is kind of an interesting story. Sarbanes-Oxley system, you're not allowed to input data, you have to key it in, and only certain people can. How can we use Palo to, they're not going to let us connect, even though we could, to make that process better. So basically it's take the information out, make it available to the web, via the web, have a workflow process for them to update the numbers and say their new findings this year, give it to the folks that are responsible for typing it in, and they typed it in. So we could have pumped it back in. Then the last step was give it to us again. We compared it to the list we provided, and you made 8 mistakes. Here's the 750,000 that were keyed wrong. So you can, you know, work within processes. If you're not able to put the stuff in, we were still able to very quickly pull it out and say, you know, you shouldn't be keying this in. We could let you put it in, but if you have to, correct these 8 mistakes, kind of thing. So at this point in October, they were actually on track to be $2.4 million under budget. So instead of the $4 million over, it was 2.4 under. And so they actually went on an exercise in October of saying, it's a good thing we got this stuff prioritized, because where are we going to spend this 2.4 to get that extra bang for our buck? And that's what they did. They went through the projects and they spent the remaining 2.4 and phoned a few service providers that were pretty happy for the extra business and really got the most out of their $30 million. And they came within a few $100,000 of their target. Okay. So, and that's all because now they're in a high quality, central decision-making kind of an environment. And there was a tight link between the budgets and the expenditures. And the formal prioritization allowed them to really reallocate these funds very quickly and very effectively and be able to back up. There's one graph that shows, you know, number of our low priority projects, medium, high, but the spending was exactly the opposite. It was all being spent on the high with very little on the low. So very effective for helping operational planning and management. So I'm not going to go into a tool demo here. This would be a view that you could look at. Just a couple of slides around the information by area. So I set some numbers. There's actually over 3,000 projects in the system. There's the 1,300 that are active. There was the 27, which is 3 million short, or 27.6. So there's where the 2.4 million was under budget. And you can also see here are the specific areas. You could drill down now into the different regions, etc. But that's looking at it from an area perspective, which is how Jim wanted to look at it. There's some of the numbers. Pick the area button, pick your month. There's your numbers. But the actual other view that's important, because these service providers were working across different areas, how are we doing by service provider? And then they did some really neat analytics. Which service provider is the best at phase 1s? Maybe we should throw them some of that phase 1 work and provide service provider number 2 with that phase 2 work, because they seem to be able to do that a little bit more cost effectively. So some really powerful benefits from a very simple kind of analysis. And then the specialists, the three specialists, actually they don't care about anything except what they're responsible for. So their top level in the tree would be the individuals. In this case, from a perspective, Nevin had 438 projects he was responsible for, and when he picked or drilled down, he could see how they were spread across the 5 service providers that worked for him, and drill down, right to the specific project information. So when finance would provide some spending figures, and they had their own spending figures, they could actually compare the two, and when they asked finance, why is this number so high, very difficult for them to answer. They could say, we think it's this because of, right down to the project level. So, that's that. So we took that to Germany, got presented, and they actually won the Best Use of Palo award for that year. And here is the presentation in Germany. Nigel Pensey is the guy up there, the little guy that looks like the penguin. And I say that affectionately because I'm his counterpart on the other side. And there's Jim receiving his award. So that was the Palo Open in 2009, and I'm very pleased to say that Grid Dynamics is still providing Talisman with services. They're taking things to the next level. The sad news for Talisman was that Jim actually left not long after this. The good news is that this was ingrained in their way of operating, and several of the existing staff there just sort of took the reins over. So on that note, the good news from a Genox perspective is Jim takes Palo with him everywhere he goes now, and so Kevin will do a presentation on where Jim is.